Hi, Ed. Hi, Liz. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Kenzie.
How are you?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Good.
Hi, Kenzie.
Ed, I was so sorry to hear about your father.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think he's doing a little better, but thank you.
It's always stressful.
Yeah.
Carrie or whomever we have, or Candace, we have the YouTube up on the, yeah, there we go.
I think it was in a bad mood yesterday, but I'm glad it's in a better mood today. We're ready to go when you are, Madam Chair.
Okay, great. I'm just going to remind folks. Oh, sorry. Carrie, can you make me a co-host? Thanks. Oh, also, that's the wrong tile in the background right now. It's the CPA one. There we go. Thanks. Welcome, Counselor Wu. Hi, Mr. President.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, colleagues,
Nice to see you.
you as well.
All right, I'm gonna get going in a sec because I got to read all these dockets into the record. And Carrie, you said we're ready, right?
Correct, Madam Chair. Ready to go when you are.
All right, I'll take one more minute. All right, we've got a couple colleagues who are just about to come in, but I think since I've got all these dockets to read, I will get us going. So I'm calling this working session of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee to order. For the record, my name is Kenzie Bach. I'm the District 8 City Councilor and also the Chair of the Ways and Means Committee. One second. This hearing, this working session, my apologies, is being recorded and live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, Verizon Fios Channel 964. And for folks' reference, working sessions are meetings of the council like this. So we'll be talking about dockets today, but it's just going to be the counselors. Sometimes we have folks testifying and sharing their thoughts with us, but today is just going to be counselors. There is a hearing on this same set of dockets that I'm about to read Monday, on the other side of the weekend at 1 p.m. So if you are looking to come and testify on the budget dockets for FY22, we'd love to have you come and testify for the 1 p.m. hearing on Monday, the 28th. Today's working session is on docket 0801, message and order for annual appropriation and tax order for FY 2022, docket 0802, message and order for annual appropriation for the school department for FY 22, docket 0803, message and order approving an appropriation of $40 million to the other post-employment benefits liability trust fund, docket 0804, message and order approving an appropriation of actually it's 0804, but I think, sorry, it's been miswritten in my thing, of $12,600,000 from the city's capital grant fund in order to provide funding for various transportation and public realm improvements to be credited to the capital grant fund from the parking meter fund. Docket 0805, message and order approving an appropriation of $2 million from the city's capital grant fund to address the impact of transportation network services on municipal roads, bridges, and other transportation infrastructure or any other public purpose substantially related to the operation of transportation network services in the city to be credited to the capital grant fund from the Commonwealth Transportation Infrastructure Enhancement Trust Fund. Docket 0810, message and order authorizing the city of Boston to accept and expend the amount of $55 million in the form of a grant awarded by the United States Department of Treasury to be administered by the city of Boston's chief financial officer, collector treasurer. This grant payment is made from the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery in the Treasury of the United States, established by Section 9901 of the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, ARPA. And then docket 0687, message and order authorizing the city of Boston to accept and expend the amount of $50 million in the form of a grant awarded by the United States Department of the Treasury to be administered by the city of Boston's chief financial officer, collector treasurer. This grant payment is made from the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery fund in the Treasury of the United States, established by Section 9901 of the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, again known as ARPA. And then docket 0725, message and order approving an increase of the cost of living adjustment COLA base from $14,000 to $15,000 for all retirees and beneficiaries of the Boston retirement system. And sorry, that was a whole mouthful. Obviously, there are a number of dockets that make up our budget per usual. There's kind of, folks know, there's the operating, there's the school's operating budget. We've already taken a first vote on capital. Those remain in committee. or they're awaiting a second reading. And then there are some assorted other funds that accompany. And then this year, we're relying substantially on the American Rescue Plan Act for revenue support for the budget. So we have a couple of those dockets as well. And then the last one that I mentioned was the one that we held a hearing on yesterday, which has to do with a cost of living adjustment for our retirees. That's something that there's $5.6 million for in the budget resubmission. And so the council is being asked to take a vote on doing that. But to do it, we really need to also have the money to do it. So it's all connected. So those are the dockets. One second. Got a couple of counselors who are going to be in a second, but joined here by Counselor Ed Flynn of District 2, Counselor Michael Flaherty at large, Counselor Liz Braden, District 9, Counselor Michelle Wu at large, and President O'Malley, our President pro tempore, and also District 6's City Councilor. I think while I'm waiting for a couple of folks who are just about to come in, I'm going to just say a word about the charter amendment, actually, and the very poorly researched editorial that came out in the Globe this morning. And I wanted to speak to that because, it didn't describe the process that the charter amendment's taken accurately at all. And I know Councillor Edwards has put out some great statements for those who are interested in the actual details on that. But what most concerned me about it, and really connects to this occasion today, was that several times the article talked with disdain about sort of the democratic process itself. It described a budget process that could devolve into dysfunction and even chaos as counselors would compete to get their issues included, a resulting hodgepodge of competing interests, legitimizing a new system of political horse trading. And what really knocked me back about it was that what it was describing was a legislative process, which is in fact how we determine a budget at every level of government in the United States. Because guess what? There are competing interests, and the best way we figured out to work them out together is to have a democratic assembly. And so that's why the US Congress does budgeting. That's why the State House does budgeting. That's why basically all select boards in the state do budgeting. So just really, I wanted to start out today by pushing back against that kind of anti-democratic ethos and stressing that kind of a test of ideas and arguing with each other and figuring out where we land is sort of the essence of democracy. And so I'm hopeful that in this process, we can really show folks what that means and why it's important. And again, recognize the fact that you don't start out at consensus. You try to get there. And oftentimes you get there by arguing and having different points of view. So that said, I also want to stress that in those legislative processes, such as many bodies have for determining a budget, the way that you figure out, how it might be changed in the legislature is through an amendment process, right? So legislators bring amendments, and then you see whether you can get a majority of your colleagues to support them. And that's the normal process. Precisely because the council can't amend the budget in our charter, we don't end up with that kind of fairly straightforward system. Instead, for folks who might be new to all of this, what the council plays with the administration in every year in the way that our system works is basically a game of guess again. So the administration files a budget, the council does a whole bunch of hearings on it. We give our feedback, we push on things, certain things rise to the fore, the public shows up, and then the administration does a resubmission. And that's basically like them guessing again. And then the question is, where is the council on that budget? And honestly, it's that's in many ways not as straightforward of a system as people having to propose amendments and see whether they pass or fail, because in many ways we're confronted with a sort of collective action problem. And it's because of the way that game is structured by our charter that we can end up in a situation like we're in this week, where we're asking, can we get to yes collectively together before the end of the fiscal year? We don't have time to play an infinite game of guess again. And I think, as I said on Wednesday, that there are substantial, really good things in the new resubmission. I felt like I was pretty on top of them, but even today, I was talking to Yusufi Valley, who does the Office of Immigrant Advancement, and hadn't realized that there's a new program, even just in the resubmission, focused on our TPS holders and the Haitian community that's really needed for this summer. So, there's some really great stuff in this resubmission. But as counselors made clear on Wednesday, there are ways in which the budget is coming up short to face some of our most pressing needs, and the body's concerned about that and concerned about authorizing it without confronting those needs more directly. And I just want to stress that, the problem with going to a 1/12 budget, not getting to yes, is real. It's something that immediately impacts our financial standing, no matter how long the wait is between that and getting a budget. And I think that there's a real risk that it's then hard to get a budget because actually nothing structurally changes about the situation. I don't think that that's the route that the people of Boston expect and hope for from us. But what encourages me today, and why I'm grateful to colleagues for talking on Wednesday and for being here, is that, in my past life, I studied game theory a little bit. And the way you sort of break a vicious cycle of a classic game like Prisoner's Dilemma, where you're kind of all trying to guess what each other is going to do, is that you collaborate and you communicate. And if folks talk to each other and share their strategies, the barriers to success disappear. So the goal of today, from my perspective as your Ways and Means Chair, is really to coordinate and share our thinking and to actually try to get to a place where we can say to the administration, not guess again, but actually, here are the things that we feel like if they were added to the budget in a supplemental appropriation, we would feel comfortable approving the budget. And so I put together a memo with some ideas based on what people said earlier in the week, and I want to get them out on the table. I haven't had a chance to talk to counselors about them because the way that we deliberate, as I mentioned before, is always in public in the city council. So, it's wanting to throw some things over to colleagues that I think reflect the conversations that we've had, but people might look at them and say, no, that's not what I was thinking. Here's another idea. The idea is to get a bunch of ideas out on the table today. And we, my committee, will make sure to get all of those over to the administration right after this working session so that they can come prepared to discuss these things on Monday. And that way, I think we can both learn about the resubmission, ask questions about the resubmission, and ask questions about, some of these supplemental things. And again, not play guess again, but instead sort of establish collectively how we can get to yes on this budget. So that's a bunch of words from me. I will go in a moment to colleagues for any initial comments or questions. And then I think what I'd like to do, because folks watching don't necessarily have the memo that I sent out, I'll just run a little bit through some of the thoughts that I had, and then open the floor for colleagues to raise ideas or comments on those. And then we'll kind of summarize where we're at and go from there. And I guess the first thing I'll say, just that my memo starts with, is that, really the criteria here, I would say, for thinking about what could get us to yes is that it be something that we can come together around. It doesn't need to mean unanimity, but it does need to mean that that it's something that, if we added it, that 7 or more counselors would see fit to pass the budget. And also, I think that the reality is, because we're so dependent on American Rescue Plan revenue this year, that expenditures have to be things that are ARP eligible. So those are the main things. With that, thank you for everybody's patience. I would like to go to my colleagues for sort of initial comments, questions. I know a few people, because we scheduled this so belatedly right after the council meeting on Wednesday, have hard stops and such. So I did want to get everybody to have a chance to get a word in, even if you have to go. And I'll also note that since I read the list, we've been joined by Councillor Lydia Edwards from District 1, Councillor Andrea Campbell, District 4, and also Councillor Anissa Sabi-George at large. So Councillor Flynn, did you have any opening questions or comments?
Well, thank you, Councillor Bach, and thank you to you as the Ways and Means Chair, and also to the City Council President, Councillor O'Malley, as well, for your leadership during this difficult time. So we certainly appreciate your work. We also recognize the staff of Mayor Janey and her team as well. I remain undecided on the budget, but I want to continue talking about our shared priorities, especially on traffic and pedestrian safety, quality of life related issues, public safety, parks and open spaces, services for our seniors, persons with disabilities and immigrants, making sure that they're fully funded as well. I was at a meeting last night up at Medal of Honor Park. There was 200 people up there, and we were talking about pedestrian safety. And it was contentious at times, but residents are really demanding from me as the district councilor a significant improvement on pedestrian-related pedestrian safety issues, infrastructure improvements, whether it's speed bumps, speed humps, stop signs, lights, beacons, flashing beacons. I think pedestrian safety is a public health crisis, and the speed limit is too high, but we also have to enforce the current speed limit. People are driving too fast in our city. Again, I think it's a public health crisis. Other issues that are concerning to me is the police, the Boston police. Residents are asking me to add more police in South Boston, in Chinatown, in the South End, in downtown Crossing. Wherever I go in the South End, people ask me, we need more police here. Bike patrols work very well in the South End. I talked to Captain Sweeney recently. That's an incredible group of people that do excellent work. And the cadet program as well. But I could go on, but I'm here to listen to my colleagues, to work with my colleagues, to work with the administration, and to be part of the team, and hopefully get to a budget that works for everybody, but especially the residents of the city of Boston, who will be mostly impacted by our decision here on Wednesday. Thank you, Council Block, and thank you, President O'Malley, as well.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As the colleague who has participated and presided over more budgets, I want to appreciate the attention to detail that you've put into this process, and all the hard work and all the hearings that you have presided over, as well as the participation of our colleagues and the participation of the administration. I've got a couple areas that I still think are deficient. I've been a longtime proponent of year-round youth jobs, and I need to see a commitment through the operating for additional funds to make a serious investment in our youth in year-round jobs. The existing pilot of 300,000 does not meet the needs that we have in the city. I've spent the last several weeks reaching out, trying to get employment opportunities for youth, and I've been working with IGR, and they can attest to the number of calls I've put in to try to secure more summer jobs. But this isn't just about summer jobs. This is about year-round jobs. This is about reducing youth violent crime. It's about creating alternatives for kids to get involved in gangs and guns and drugs. So some argue it could be the asphalt temperature. I argue that we need year-round jobs for youth. That will go a long way in solving the problem. So, and I've been saying it for years. And so, it's not just at this budget. So we need an investment in year-round opportunities for our children. BPS seeking commitment that a portion of operating go to Madison Park. The fact that we don't have the best, we got the best colleges and universities in the world that call Boston their home, but when it comes to Voc Tech, we're not so boastful. And so we need a Madison Park that meets the labor workforce demands in our city. CEOs are bringing their companies to Boston. Their businesses are growing, even throughout the pandemic. And as we come out of the pandemic, if we're not preparing, our students, that next generation, for pathways into high earning jobs, that are in their own backyard. One of the things that Council Flynn and I talk about is we're meeting with these CEOs that are coming to the South Boston waterfront. We want to make sure that there's opportunities for folks in the neighborhood. We also want to make sure that opportunity trickles throughout all of the neighborhoods of Boston so that it's a rising tide for the whole city. That's what we envision down there. And the fact that we don't have that type of commitment, as it pertains to programming and matching the curriculum to meet, again, the labor workforce demands is outrageous. So integrated work and learning, early college programs. We've got a program that has demonstrated success in year 13, and we've garnered industry and higher ed support. I would love to see more attention to that. Library facilities in every school with the appropriate staffing levels, as well as mental health investments to meet the surge in the needs that the students have presented this year after a very difficult year due to COVID. The D&D budget needs to see additional funding for our acquisition opportunity program, first time buyer programs. If our D&D team has a portfolio of potential sites we can purchase, as referenced very articulately, this week in our session with both, Council Baker, Councilor Edwards, and yourself, in terms of why we're not in the business of acquiring properties and managing them and creating more affordable opportunities is, again, mind-boggling. And obviously the one that we all struggle with, Mass and CAS, increased funding for trauma services and resources for those. We need treatment on demand. We need to have beds ready when that individual is ready for treatment. I argue that a big part of my success has been the Section 35s, but we still need opportunities and treatment options in aftercare. It's not just about the quick detox. Many instances, it's not long enough. When you're on the opioids that long, if the 30 days is like a spin dry, you need at least 6 months to a year of good, clean living just to have a shot at beating that type of addiction, the opioid addiction. So I got a question. There's a 250,000 marked up for expanding wraparound services for homeless, and not quite sure what that's going to be used for, but that number should be significantly higher. And lastly, because I know my colleagues have concerns, the parks budget, it increased minimally, only 4% this year. So we're either going to be pro-environment as a city, and we're going to create more opportunities in our parks for our youth and for families. And we're going to plant more trees and create more canopy options. We need to have a legitimate bona fide tree pruning, tree planting, and tree canopy division. Time has come for us to not continue to contract those services out. Let's put our money where our mouth is. Let's stand up for the environment. Let's stand up for parks, and let's make it loud and clear that 4%, is arguably offensive, particularly for those that care about our parks. I know, Madam Chair, in your district, particularly as the Emerald Necklace, park ranges, et cetera. I mean, 4% is just not going to cut the mustard. It's clearly not going to give us our own, tree pruning, tree planting, and canopy oversight division. So I'd like to see that. So that's it for me for now, but that's where my head's at. And look to see more from the administration on all these fronts.
Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. I had promised Councillor Campbell that she would get in before 4 o'clock. So Councillor Campbell, I'll let you go out of order if you're.
Thank you, Councillor Bach, and thank you to my colleagues. Appreciate it. I'm going to try to come back on. I just had a conflict. I could not move. So I appreciate you scheduling this time for us. One, I didn't see anything in the document about the police department, and I've obviously continued to lift up concerns with respect to the budget, with respect to BPD. One, I do not think that a strategy to reduce overtime should involve redirecting those dollars into the police department. We have over 2,000 officers. We just graduated a class. I think there are enough officers in the system. I think there needs to be a really deep conversation about restructuring this department so every neighborhood has the coverage that they need for the calls that they get. I know captains for a long time have been suggesting ways to do that. And so how do we do that in this moment in time? And I know we've had several hearings on this, including overtime hearings, and have heard folks say they're exploring it, but nothing of significance come out of those conversations. I have not seen a strategy with specifics on how we're going to rein in any percentage of the overtime budget, which I think is really concerning, especially when the department agrees that it's a budget that is not sustainable coming out of COVID in long term. I also think there needs to be some strategy, not just a strategy, but a number or something as to how we're going to make that reduction happen. Clearly, the previous administration tried to do it, and we know that the department exceeded that. So would love to see more specifics in any document related to the police department. Have stressed this in meetings, or I should say in hearings, have not had any meetings with the administration, not for lack of trying. The second is definitely mass and cast. There are some investments in here around it, but again, who's owning this issue? I'm calling it a mass and cast chief. We can refer to it as whatever, but someone who is a public health professional whose sole job it is to own this issue is critical. There are many stakeholders doing the work. They're members of the task force as well, but they're all disjointed. It's not coordinated. Someone needs to own it, and not COVID and a million other things, just this. Put forward ideas from community around this sort of responder unit. Have yet to receive a response on that. Also requests made over 30 days ago for folks in the community doing this work and in the business community to meet with the acting mayor and administration to put forth their ideas, to hear the response to these ideas, and to hear their ideas from the administration, and have gotten no response whatsoever to any of that correspondence. So obviously that's not necessarily monetary, it's action steps. It's the commitment to meet with folks, and we haven't gotten any response, I or my team in my office, to that, which is disappointing. So that continues to be on my list. And then on Boston Public Schools, a lot of concerns around infrastructure in the short term. I continue to lift up the Sarah Greenwood School, which is in my district, them needing a temporary location, greater investment now on the acceleration of school projects. So I've sent these same things. Councilor Bach can do that, but really stressing there needs to be something around the Boston Police Department. I did review your documents. Thank you for compiling them, of course. But if there's nothing in there, for me, that's unacceptable. And so we'll continue to work with you. And again, thank you to my colleagues. I'm going to try to hop back on again and continue to work in partnership with you as well as council colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Campbell. And Councilor Campbell, before you go, I'll just say that that is missing from my document, and it's partly because I haven't. I share your concerns about the overtime budget and the feasibility of actually achieving it. One thing I would love from colleagues is any suggestions of moves that we could make on the police budget that could command a majority of this body. Because frankly, I've heard very different things from different counselors about the direction folks want us to go on that. And so that's why, Councilor Campbell, I was trying in that document to mostly suggest things that were kind of themes that people shared and that weren't that like people weren't deeply disagreeing about, only as a kind of, well, what have I pulled out and so I think that the police department budget is a key piece of the conversation here too. So just wanted to acknowledge that.
I'll say, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I still, want it reflected, even if we don't have a majority on this council that recognizes that something needs to be done with respect to that budget, and the lack of transparency and accountability with this department. I'm going to keep pushing it.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Campbell. Councilor Braden and then Councilor Wu.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for pulling this together in a further conversation about our budget priorities. I want to echo Councillor Flynn's concerns about pedestrian safety. It was a big issue on my list of priorities for this budget. Again, I think what we're seeing with our department BTD is that very often we are coming up with lots of new studies on road safety and mobility studies, etc. But we don't actually have the personnel or the staff available to really make it happen in a timely fashion. And we have to prioritize, obviously, but some things get punted down the road so far that they're so far off in the distance, we don't know when they're going to happen. So the other concern I have, I know Councillor Edwards and the folks closer to the harbour are very concerned about climate preparedness. Out in Alston Brighton, we have the threat of river flooding, and if there's an extreme weather event with a lot of rain, we're really going to be in a difficult flooding situation. So having a really aggressive approach to addressing climate preparedness and climate resiliency, to address our heat island effect, and make sure that we have a robust growth in our urban tree canopy. Issues around stormwater management, and trying to incentivize people to, do rain gardens and bioswales, etc., on private as well as public property, to try and help manage the runoff and storm and the flooding potential. And again, to echo some of your concerns, I really want to see more. There's a lot of work to do in the green jobs space, and I think that it's an opportunity to really ramp that up and be more aggressive in developing that sort of workforce. The other issue in relation to the heat is probably going to be more of a problem than like hurricanes or whatever, knock on wood. But we saw this summer, this early spring, late spring, we had a heat wave. Our kids were still in school. It was 95 degrees. It was unsafe to be in school. Exactly, it was so hot. So, that we anticipate that trend is going to continue. So we really need to look at our heating and cooling, our cooling systems in our schools, so that they become not only a great place for our students to study during the hot weather in the late spring and in the fall, where we expect increased temperatures, but also for our residents or seniors who want to go have a cooling centre. Workforce development, as I said, the biotech space is developing fast, and we need our young people to be prepared, not necessarily have master's degrees in chemistry or whatever, but for those entry-level jobs to become lab technicians, etc. Those are good paying jobs, and if we don't prepare our workforce to take advantage of that, we're going to miss the boat. And again, just ongoing concerns about my district and the situation with our schools, the need to identify swing space for our horace men, and really strategize about how we're going to manage the transition with the Jackson Man community, the Jackson Man campus, which has 3 entities. It's a year away, and I'm not really convinced that we have a good plan for that yet. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Braden. Councillor Wu?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Sorry, I think I, like many others, am wanting to be here to make it work, but as you can see, I'm en route between various items. So I just want to thank you, Madam Chair. I know this is an extraordinary feat this year, given that we are in extraordinary circumstances just in general in the world, and then also with our political situation here in Boston. And so given that this is a year, or now at this point, a little 4.5 months more of extraordinary transition for the city of Boston, to emphasize that from my perspective, this feels different than last year. I think in some ways the type of council leadership and coordination and the really leaning in on how we can proactively shape this budget is exactly what I've been hoping to see and pushing to encourage over the last several years. I wish a little bit more that we were pushing on the budget itself, in addition to just thinking about adding the American Rescue Plans on top, because this is not sort of a structural solution to how the council in general can continue doing, pushing for integrating our changes and our voices into the budget process. I thought the list that you circulated ahead of time represented a pretty good cross-section of what the feedback seems to have been from the council throughout the many working sessions and hearings that you have chaired. Another item that I will toss in there is around childcare infrastructure. And this could fit through the BPS early education side of things, or it could be more tied to the operations of how the City of Boston has been building out the Childcare Entrepreneurship Fund and ways to really encourage those who are hoping to start new businesses or maintain them, to keep those seats in Boston, because we are seeing a shutdown of more and more seats across our neighborhoods. And then just to agree in general with the wide-ranging set of perspectives that councillors are bringing to this race, I want to note that, again, this is a moment where multiple candidates, and not just several of us from the council, are going across the city to set forward our visions of what the next administration should deliver. That is very much tied to the budget, but hashing it out through the budget is a very complicated prospect. And so we should be setting the foundation for the next administration, again, in just over 4 months, to be able to make those big changes in alignment with the vision and mandate they will have earned in the November election. And so I am worrying less about trying to accomplish each one of my priority areas through this budget than ensuring that we have financial stability throughout this transition and coming to some consensus about changes, major changes that we could make to improve where we stand now. So thank you for your leadership. I will just add that one little contribution and look forward to continue staying engaged in these sessions over the next couple of days. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Wu. And I should just say to Councillor Wu's point, I mean, I have made the suggestion that we talk primarily about a supplemental with American Rescue Plan funds. If councillors have operating fund sort of proper suggestions, like I think, it'd be appropriate to bring those here and to bring those over the next few days. I'm aware that because we get set at the sort of limit on the revenue side on operating funds, that, everything has to come from somewhere else. And I think in terms of getting everybody to consensus, that might be more of a challenge. But I take the point, Councillor Wu, and I'll just say that for me, part of the hope is that we do pass the charter amendment and we're able to do that more traditional amendment process on directly on the operating budget on the council going forward. And I do think that it's appropriate to underscore the fact that there is a field of contestation about the future of the city that is ongoing right now, and it is the mayor's race. And this budget isn't that field. That field, it's super important. I think it's essential, and we're having a really good conversation, and I'm grateful to all the candidates who are also counselors and to the candidates who are not for leading that conversation. I think the question here is it's about financial stability, and it's about, in terms of some of these things that were, in my memo and coming out from counselors' comments, how are we setting up whomever the people of Boston choose to lead them with the strongest hand in November, and helping folks hit the ground running on some of the things that we know that whomever it is going to is going to need to be working on. So just thank you for those comments. Next up is our President O'Malley, who, again, as Councillor Flynn alluded to, has really been leading on this as well, and thinking about how we get there collectively. And I appreciate his leadership of the body. So I'll go to O'Malley, and then it will be Edwards, and then Asabi George. President O'Malley.
Well, back at you, Madam Chair. As I've said publicly and privately, just bravo for a job well done. This is clearly a thankless job, but one that you have just shown tremendous dedication and tenacity, and that's what we need because the stakes are this high. Certainly I echo every point that has been made thus far. Every point, I agree with everything that has been said. And I appreciated Councillor Wu's point about not only the ARP funds, but also looking at the budget. That is correct. I also appreciated your explanation that the approach of us trying to get to yes would allow for the second sort of unique revenue that presents itself before us today or at this time. And, I think there are many differences between this year's budget and last year's budget. And yet there's a lot of similarities, if that makes sense. It sounds like I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth, but I'm not. But I'm simply noting the fact that one of the larger issues that is before us is that, keep in mind, last year's budget debate, we were in month 3 of a pandemic. We had no earthly clue what the following year was going to look like. We thought the risk of going to a 1/12 budget could severely impact what our state revenue, our matching state aid would look like. And there was a real concern that we would be in a worldwide depression potentially at this point. we're not. We're actually in a place that's a lot stronger financially. As I mentioned the other day, that's not to suggest we don't have deep income inequality. That's not to suggest we don't have deep structural issues that we need to address as a city. But I think it allows us this opportunity to have a frank and robust discussion on our budget and how we get there. And it's not only individual line items, although those are important, and I will get to some. This is a big preamble, but it's also our approach on what it looks like. And I really appreciated Councillor Edwards' remarks and your remarks the other day, particularly as it relates to this being the mayor and the council's budget, this being this collaborative approach. And one thing I take very, very seriously as your acting council president, as your council president pro tempore, is making sure that this body feels respected, feels as though each and every one of us are part of this decision-making process. And it's something that I have reiterated to the acting mayor and will continue to do so in the days ahead. There's an opportunity for us, I believe, to get to yes. And I think it's pretty clear that we are not there yet. And I am hopeful that this first sort of reset, this first, as Councillor Edwards said the other day, or I hope reset, this first working session and subsequent hearings and conversations going forward can yield us to that place. It's my opinion that it is an easy thing to vote no on a budget. And it's actually hard to get to yes, and I'm prepared to try to get there. And I know each and every one of you are as well. But again, we're not there yet. So I'm hopeful that continued conversations, continued attention to detail. It looks really, it's impressive when you look at the resubmitted numbers, and behind my Zoom, I have a spreadsheet that I believe Michelle Goldberg has compiled for us from central staff. Well done, Michelle. It's really, really helpful. And it shows the resubmission difference and what that looks like. And it's, other than economic development having $3.5 million going into the Office of Equity, which I assume will be explained at the hearing on Monday, you're seeing just increases of hundreds of thousands of dollars, or I should say $50,000 and above in most categories, which is a positive step. But again, I'd like to see more level of detail. I think Frank Baker, Councillor Baker's speech on Mass and Cass the other day was the finest speech I've ever heard him give, and someone who's been a colleague and a friend for 10 years. And so I think, and that's an issue that we all care about, whether we represent that area or not. So I think having some more specificity and plans on Mass and Cass and what the plan will be from the administration on Monday is key. As it relates to housing, something Councillor Edwards has been a champion on, and what it looks like, it just can't simply be, throwing money ahead. We need a detailed plan before us, and we need to also form these plans with conversations with all of us elected officials, particularly those who have been elected to be the voice of our neighborhoods and our districts. Environmental initiatives, I am glad to see an increase in number, but I want to see some more specifics on trash collection and composting. I've gotten this in the budget the last couple of years. We have a great success story, but it feels like the movie Groundhog Day, where it hasn't yet been implemented. And let me underscore the fact that this is an opt-in program. This is a subscription service. It's voluntary, of course, but it's as cost neutral as one could get as it relates to being implemented. So I need a start date. It's got to be September 1 or thereabouts for this to actually make sense. More than that, using some of these funds as it relates to resiliency, as it relates to building our infrastructure. We have community choice energy because of the work that Councillor Wu and I did a number of years ago with all your support, those who were serving at the time. We need to build some more infrastructure. I want to see solar canopies over every municipal parking lot in the city of Boston where they will work. I want to see EV charging stations. I think now 4 councillors, so I think a full third of the council drives an EV, an electric vehicle. That's great. We want to also incentivize other Bostonians to be able to do so. Looking at building retrofits, the work that we are all doing collectively on building standards and Berto 2.0. We need to have some city funds available to help some of our buildings begin the process of becoming net zero carbon. So there's a lot of specifics that we can put in this budget, just not these large numbers. And it's really working with the councilors to try to listen to us, work with us, use us as partners. We are, we all come from the same street. It is a two-way street, but we all come from the same street here. We are all elected by our districts to serve the entire city of Boston, and the acting mayors included that as well. So I'm hopeful that we will continue these good conversations. I do want to talk about BPS as well, because that's obviously another issue where I think that we need a lot more change and commitments, at least for myself, to get to yes. And I think other colleagues as well have indicated as such. I will talk about the exam schools because that's something that's very important to me and all of us. But it's not just the exam schools, but I will start by talking about what I've been saying for the better part of a year, is that this debate is, it's not simple. We can't simply say this is about equity or excellence. This isn't about access to education or strong, rigorous standards. Those two notions are not in conflict with one another. I've been saying this for a year plus, and there's a way that we can achieve both. And it involves, yes, a test. It involves grades. It involves looking at a strategic plan to access to admission, working not with zip codes, but with census tracts, looking at not lotteries, but having straight rankings. We can do what we all seek to do here. And the plans have just, we're in limbo, and we need to see leadership from the superintendent. We need to see leadership from the acting mayor. We need to see something happen. And I'm hopeful we can get there. I've had many conversations, as recently as today, with the superintendent, with the acting mayor as well. I want to echo something Councillor Sabi George said the other night. I wish all this attention was focused on the non-exam high schools as we talk about what we need to work on. And that gets to the other point, which is equally a concern to me as it relates to the education budget, that in the 11 years I've served, the city's population has grown by probably 150,000 people, and the BPS student population has decreased by probably 10 or 15,000 people. I mean, it's remarkable, and it's an indictment on all of us, quite frankly, that BPS is not being sought after. And I think that we need to show a real commitment and a change. Yes, funding's part of it, but we are putting, $1.3 billion to BPS. And it's not simple as just throwing money ahead. It's looking at inefficiencies around central office. And I say this as someone who counts many folks who work at the bowling building among my friends, but we're seeing more and more people at all of these budget meetings every year. And that's money that's better spent in the classrooms. It's looking at, yes, Madison Park, but also English High School, also Snowden International High School, also all these other high schools that we have real opportunities to have better partnerships with our colleges, with our universities, with our hospitals, making sure that we can, there's no reason why we shouldn't have partnerships in turn with the Longwood Medical Area in your district, Councillor Bach. There's so many opportunities here that I just hope that we get serious about. We're not going to solve it over the next 4 or 5 days. I mean, I'm not naive enough to suggest that any of us could come up with this magic bullet, but we can have better plans going forward. And I am hopeful we can get there, but we are sure as heck not there yet. So that's sort of the big picture issues. I appreciate it. I think I've perhaps gone on a little bit longer than I'd anticipated, but I would close simply by saying we can get to yes with better plans, with strong leadership, with respect, and with collaboration, and with this council and this acting mayor working collaboratively to get there for the people of Boston. It's going to take some work, but I'm confident we can get it done. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. President. And there's always extra time for the president. Next up is Councillor Edwards. And then I should say we were joined a while back by Councillor Julia Mejia, who I neglected to recognize. So it'll be Councillor Edwards, then Councillor Sabi George, then Councillor Mejia. And Councillor Edwards, obviously, I took a moment up at the top to acknowledge the conversation about the charter amendment today, and would feel it entirely appropriate if you wanted to do that as well. So you have the floor.
You know me too well. You know me too well that I would probably have taken that moment even if it was not appropriate. But I do appreciate you bringing up the I think ill-informed, inaccurate, and rushed opinion to just shoot down democracy by the Boston Globe. The reason why it's so important and why we're talking about this right now is because we wouldn't be talking about this right now and going back and forth in supplemental budgets this way if that charter amendment passes. We would be guaranteed that we are going to have a budget on the 30th of June every year, because at some point, the mayor would either just get to a consensus with enough councilors and we'd all agree, or the councilors would come to a consensus and disagree collectively with the mayor on a budget. But that's how this would end this. The point is about fiscal stability and consistency. We would be required to get to budgets. And if we couldn't do it as the body, the mayor would be doing it. That's what that's about. Not only that, but I was late to this hearing because I was talking with the mayor's people in my office with my staff directly about just my district. And the fact is that conversation should be as public for everyone else to see. And that's what I would be doing on the floor when I'm discussing down to the specific intricacies of the budget, what I'm concerned about, what I want, what I don't want, so on and so forth. And I'll bring up some of those things today, but we're talking big picture items. The system needs to be changed. And I'll say that again, the system needs to be changed. And that is something that I promised at the last budget vote that we needed to assess. And again, talking about being ill-informed, we followed the law and the legal procedure outlined and the deadlines and timeline within the law, the state law, in order to do a charter amendment. So I will, of course, be coming back with a larger op-ed in response to the overall merits of the charter amendment. But again, to just argue that we shouldn't even have the choice as Bostonians this fall is just embarrassingly ill-informed, inaccurate, and anti-democratic. And it was just, well, and also talk about getting cart before the horse. I don't know if they called any of you, my colleagues who voted for this at all in advance of their coming out against what we voted for unanimously. But for a media entity that has gotten, I don't know how many Peabodys and how many Pulitzers and how many awards for its incredible in-depth research and going into spotlights and looking at and talking to people repeatedly for, I don't know how many months, if not years, to make sure that they get everything correct, to not make one phone call to any of us to even ask what we thought or why we did what we did. Well, I can just say do better, do better. Now, as to this budget process, I want to say that there are a couple groups of things. In my comments on Wednesday, I discussed specifically that this budget didn't reflect that housing is a human right. So naturally, most people would say, well, how the hell does a budget reflect that? Besides just throwing money at the issues that are concerns and maintaining how we're doing things, but just giving them scale. And we are doing some things correct. I want to be clear. There are hardworking people in our housing at BHA, at DND, even at the BPDA, who are doing a lot of good things. And I think that they do need additional funding. But that's not the same as saying housing is a human right. Rights, where rights are involved, government is required to be more aggressive, more assertive, and assuring that people have access. That is what a right means to me. And so when I think about housing as a human right, I wonder where the city of Boston is becoming more aggressive, more assertive to counter oftentimes market forces that don't care about rights. They care about profits. So how do we counter that? Our system currently is dependent on that. Oftentimes we look to the market to come up with our housing solutions and our housing funding. So I would like us to divorce a little bit from that and commit more funding, specifically to pushing back and competing in the market to pull housing units off the market. What I'm talking about is our acquisition opportunity program. That needs to be beefed up in two ways. While there's about $30 million going towards it, I'm going to offer an aggressive number that I think $60 million should be going towards it. I think the amount of units that are below 60% AMI and about 300 right now is too low, and we need to be funding more of those. So maybe there's a combination of the back and forth we can have today where we're getting more of those lower AMI units off the market. But I can tell you every CDC, the land trust, those individual organizations that have come to me, even when they try to use this program, they find that the per unit allocation is way too low. So they're ready to go and close, or they're ready to go and purchase that triple decker, or the tenants have organized and they would love nothing more than for the local nonprofit to purchase it, and the person is willing to sell it, but they're short. We lost a triple decker with we lost 7 apartments in East Boston for a shortfall of $40,000. Shameful. So that's one aspect of housing as a human right. I also want to talk about the way in which land becomes publicly owned, or at least again under land trusts owned collectively. And the two are not the same. The land is one way of ownership and one way of controlling what gets built on there, which can be funded by AOP. But both are headed in the same way, that we need to be competing, if not taking some land and some buildings off the private market, because we cannot win. That's way we cannot win. What we found is that we tried the market forces where you build and build and build some more, and we're still building more, and the rents are not going down. We did try that. The goal is 60,000 or 69,000 new units. The rents are not going down. So, and no one, I don't know anyone else who can dispute that. I am not trying to prevent the market. I am a landlord myself. I own and live in my own property. And I probably, but for that ownership, I would not be in Boston because I couldn't afford the rents right now. So that's one aspect. The other aspect, and swinging over beyond housing as a human right, is looking at, to put a number to it, I want $10 million as a fund for land trust acquisitions of land throughout the city of Boston. So I'm just putting the numbers out there. Then there's the question of how we process, move on, and include people in the city of Boston. I said it on the floor, I say it again today. I want everyone to be able to perform or access the city government departments online and in every language. I mean it. And our current budget went up $5 million only from last year's Do It budget to this year's Do It budget. And I don't believe for 1 second that $5 million increase is going to get us there. We know that if we didn't have access points online for all the people of Boston, we functionally would have shut down as a government during this pandemic. And what we also learned is that these access points were different depending on the department. Allowed some people to speak, didn't allow some others to speak, were really good in terms of vibrancy and good connectedness, and not. I've learned from my colleague, from Councillor Bach, also the lack of connectedness and assured Wi-Fi for our residents in public housing. These are all points of access to digital footprints that we absolutely cannot afford not to invest in. I want a robust investment in that. And I could see, and hopefully we'll see, that one day I log on to the city of Boston and a helper comes up online and says, how may I help you? Pick a language. And then I can pick a language, and that helper or that little guide person can help me move through and navigate the city of Boston, all from my living room or all from my bus stop or wherever the heck I am. We're not there with this budget. I do think I wanted to add to the conversation about the police. You're correct, Councillor Bach. There's genuine consensus that the overtime is an issue. There's also genuine consensus and knowledge that the budget process, as we learned from last year, this budget process does not fix the overtime issue, right? The contract does. But I also wanted to acknowledge for the people at home how many times Councillor Bach, Councillor Campbell specifically asked the police to come with solutions for the budgeting and helping with fiscal stewardship. And how many times the police basically said they really didn't have a difference of operating. And so this body did ask and are willing to partner with the police on how to make sure that they're more fiscally steward. But I just wanted that to be clear. It wasn't for lack of we're not thinking about it. I know all of us have gotten calls. All of us have gotten calls about the police budget and how it didn't go far enough in terms of, for some people, reducing the police budgets. But again, I'll remind people how that happens and where the biggest increase is in overtime, and that is a contract issue. I want to end by, make sure, oh yes. And finally, I want to end by the last program that I feel the city did execute quite well and needs to beef up exponentially, and that's the High Road Kitchens program in partnership and helping with mini grants, just outright money to smaller restaurants, majority of them not downtown, who are in the small neighborhoods, bodegas, cafes, so on and so forth. We gave out grants of $15,000 to $20,000 to them to allow for them to pay for their staff to keep going in exchange for, and that's what's important, them taking courses in sexual harassment and best practices. We did not necessarily make an exchange for giving up the tip minimum wage, but we did make it in exchange for something. So I would like to see that program exponentially increased. We had a wonderful conversation with Natalia, and I will get a firm number for you, but I don't have that right now, Councilor Bach. Those are my 3 bucket areas that I felt that you gave me as homework to come back with some numbers. So I'm working. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Edwards. Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for pulling us together with such quickness after Wednesday's meeting, and looking forward to the few sessions that are coming up ahead. You know, there's I think this is my 6th budget. I guess I should go back and count exactly, but I suppose my 5th budget. But just grateful to have participated again through this process, and grateful for your leadership. I am quite aware that we have never had a perfect budget, that it continues to be a work in progress in each budget cycle that we've gone through over, you know, since my first, you know, always looking for the best that we can do at this moment in time, and making sure that we are responding to the needs of our residents across the city, and that we're able to do the work that we need to do as a city to provide high quality services across the board. You know, just, you know, my sort of general thoughts about the process to date is we've really missed some opportunities for true collaboration and getting to a better spot with this budget. And I'm hopeful that over the next couple of days that we can do that. And, you know, certainly there are very specific asks that I have around making sure that all of our schools have a full-time social worker or a mental health provider in all of our schools. There are 26 schools for September, and as it is outlined in or funded in this current budget that's before us, that will have part-time providers. We need to right-size that, full-size that. That's 13 additional social workers or providers to add to this budget. Certainly, and, you know, colleagues have mentioned some of the other needs around housing, around climate preparedness and readiness, the continued investment in what's happening at Mass and Cass, and the work to improve the response to both the community and individuals who are in crisis. Certainly have to do that. And, you know, just very hopeful about the possible outcomes and work that we can do over the next couple of days as we look towards next Wednesday. Certainly there is some difficulty around the schools piece and some of the missing pieces related to the school committee meeting, which won't happen until after our council meeting Wednesday at noon. So looking forward to some additional commitments around some of these general pieces. You know, have shared a number of times with the interim administration my budget asks, sort of the broad brushstrokes, as well as the in the weeds pieces around providers, around some of the Mass and Cass efforts, around some of the additional supports for Madison Park Vocational Technical High School, around libraries and librarians in our schools, and making sure that we are fulfilling our commitment to a full-time nurse in all of our buildings. But sort of across the board, the needs are real, and appreciate and understand and recognize that certainly not going to get everything that I want in this budget. And there's, you know, continued work to do following the passage of the budget. My question for today, and at least for this session, especially as we prepare for next week's hearing, is what are the possible outcomes over the next couple of, or following or leading up to June 30th. If we don't pass the budget, what happens next? What is the process and the outlook going forward? What are the, you know, what's the calendar look like? What is, you know, what's a 112 look like? And does that extend over a period of 12 months? And I think we've covered this maybe quickly once before. Is it something that can last just 1 or 2 weeks? I know, you know, there are some funds that are important to a few of the departments that are that they're waiting for on July 1. If we weren't to pass a budget next week, is there an opportunity to allow some programming to continue as the summer months approach and the new fiscal year approaches? I'm not sure if, Madam Chair, if you have if you have the ability to respond to that, but I'd like to know sort of the possible A, B, C, D could happen.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Asabi George. I'll speak a little bit to it. And I think also, we can, I think, I'm sure they're watching, make sure that the administration is prepared to address that on Monday. So for folks, the way this process works is that if we don't have a budget voted in by the end of the fiscal year, and it happens that this year our vote is actually on the day of the end of the fiscal year, on the 30th, also my birthday. If we don't have a budget by then on the 1st, we go to what people are referring to as a 112, which what it means is that each month you just go to 1/12 of the budget from last year, right? The full annual budget. So it's basically and at first that seems like not so bad, right? That's a continuity budget. It's the same as we have right now. The challenge with it is a couple fold. One is that any place where you have a cost increase, you're not doing your allocation that was meant to meet that cost increase is not happening. So you end up with things that you have to cut. The other thing is that obviously anything that's new that was not funded last year that's meant to be funded this year, it doesn't get funded. And the challenges in terms of your point, Councillor Asabi George, about, could people move money around and do some of the things that sort of need the money in the urgently in the summer. The challenge is that the whole point of the 112 is that there's been no democratic authorization for a new budget. So they have to default back to this, what was approved last year. So there's not really that same kind of wiggle room. I'll say that, certainly, and again, I think I would ask the administration to come and speak about this on Monday. In terms of the things that have trickled up to me from the grapevine of kind of concern about timing, the ones that I've heard directly from people so far have been, we have a major significant investment in youth summer jobs in this budget. That program is meant to start on July 6th. And it's a particularly major investment because it's going up a bit from last year. But the thing is that last year we went up in a big way and we funded it with CARES Act money. So the problem is that money that filled the gap last year isn't in our operating budget, right? It's because it was CARES Act was a separate bucket last year. So I think the youth jobs line item, YEE, is up like 4.5 million or something from last year. So that's a very major gap if that goes away. I know that the Dreamer program specifically was not funded last year, and this new TPS thing that I mentioned at the start was not. I know that Orion Heights, the public housing development that has a significant gap filler in this budget, is looking to close that deal. And they're actually just waiting on budget approval for that. And I used to be in that world, and when you're lining up affordable housing tax credits and all the paperwork, the timing can get quite tight. So I know that that's an issue, but I won't. I think the administration is probably more familiar than I am with sort of what are the immediate impacts. I think the thing that I would stress is that, as I set up at the start, when people, whether you're talking about the rating agencies or other outside observers, sort of look at the city of Boston, the challenge is that one of the questions they ask themselves is, do they get a budget by the end of their fiscal year? And so that's a kind of yes, no question. And so the issue of, there's a few weeks or is a few months. And obviously Councillor Baker expressed his view on Wednesday that it wouldn't happen that quickly. But I think there's that question about timing, but then there's also just this bimodal question of does it happen or not? And it is worth saying that the state routinely misses their deadline and our bond rating is better than theirs. There's a lot of factors at play, but the fact that this isn't something that we've done since I think the early 80s does play us. It's a factor, right?
So the other question that I would have for the administration for Monday is, are there implications from positive perhaps implications from last year's hiring freeze. So over the course of the last fiscal year or the current fiscal year, we've had, retirements, people leaving positions, or positions that weren't filled prior to COVID. So in last fiscal year that, those dollars sort of remained, but unused. Is there a way to calculate the sort of the balance or the remaining dollars that could be utilized, for example, on the Dreamers piece or on some of the summer jobs?
Yeah, so that's a question we'll have to ask them. My impression is that potentially within departments, but not across departments.
Right.
I think, we should defer, I think, to the CFO's office.
Well, I would say, I'm curious about that in our city's departments. The school department, separate from that, often has significant cost overruns in one department, say school transportation, for example, and they pick up those funds from another department where there's been quote unquote savings, which means positions weren't filled or services weren't provided. And generally we see cost overruns in the several million up to $10 million mark. Where this past fiscal year, we saw a $1 million overrun, even though school was barely in session this last year. Anyway, so just, curious about and, would like to know and understand both the ramifications and remain hopeful that there's an opportunity to better collaborate over the last couple of days of this current fiscal year. Thank you, Madam Chair.
No, that sounds good. And yeah, we'll forward those questions onto them. And I do know that for the school department side, there are different departments, like from our charter's perspective, they're all one department. And then I know that my recollection is that the collector treasurer is allowed to move up to $3 million a year across departments. And we tend to get an April notification of what they've done on that front. But I think there's a hard cap in the charter of how much interdepartment money moving you're allowed to do. But we'll get all that from them. All right, Councilor Mejia. Let me just check.
Sorry, I was on mute. So yeah, I have a few questions, but I think, this is my second budget, and I'm so incredibly in awe of the passion that I'm seeing this year. That wow, if I would have known now what I knew then, and all the powers that we have, we would have been so much more aggressive last year. But here we are. And I don't know, Kenzie, I know Councilor Baki and Lydia and Councilor Edwards talked about what this moment is and the differences in his leadership. But I also think that this moment is really rare. And as a woman of color, it just is really just interesting that, I don't know where our power, did we just take off our capes last year and realize that we didn't have any power to push the mayor? Because if we were pushing for all of these things that I'm hearing right now, this is the first, it feels like to me, the first, I'm gonna have to go through all these tapes and hear how much passion came out of everyone last year. It's just very interesting, but here we are. It's election season, so everybody's up in arms. Let me just throw my questions out here. Here's where I'm at. So in terms of, we've been working with the administration to ensure that there is funding for new youth jobs for young people, specifically for 19 to 24-year-olds in this budget. And for the new 19 to 24-year-old positions, it's still unclear as to whether or not the number of the slots or number of weeks, number of hours per week and pay per hour. I'd like some more details in terms of what that rollout is going to look like. We need to see a lot more money going into that fund I think, like Councilor Flaherty mentioned, the number of year-round jobs for young people ages 9 to 24 is not enough. And so, we asked for 1.3 million and we got 300,000. And that is not meeting the cut or meeting the moment, in my personal humble opinion. The other piece is, I appreciate the chair's memo. There is a discussion around the timeline for the municipal broadband study. I think that this is an important question to ask, and I would like to also ensure that we have people who are committed to a community center process facilitating this study. It needs to be community driven. And while I appreciate the study, we were asking for municipal broadband. And we already know that we need it. I don't even understand why we need to do a study maybe it's a study to figure out the infrastructure for it, but I think I'd like to see a timeline and a deadline and then some outcomes of what is next and what is to follow. We still need some answers around when the new police classes would start and what the cost of each class would be in this year's budget and in the future budgets. There's still an unresolved issue around public safety reforms that people have been calling for, including Mayor Janey last year. This includes getting rid of the gang database, which is something that I think is more of a policy, not so much a budget, but I think that that's definitely something that we can work towards here. Reducing the number of cadet classes. If we're willing to compromise, can we just do one class instead of two? And also permanently ending the RFP for security cameras. Where is that in the conversation, and how are we going to negotiate that on the council? And then when it comes to BPS, as a BPS graduate and as a BPS parent, there's still a lot of work to do. And while everybody's hooting and hollering about these exam schools, Madison Park continues to go neglected. The Margarita Muñez is able to expand, but they don't have the facilities to do so. Boston Day and Evening Academy. I just feel like there's so many stepchildren in the Boston Public School system. When you think about facilities and who's getting what, it's like a trickle down in effect, right? And those who have the most usually end up with everything. And those who have the least are lucky to have crumbs. And so I think we need to be a little bit more aggressive about some of our financial commitments in BPS. And I will continue to harp on Madison. And I believe that the Margarita Muñez needs facilities to expand. They're one of the only dual language high schools here in the city of Boston. And I think we need to support and expand. And then in regards to, I reached out to whoever would listen, advocating for ethnic studies program. I would like to see where the financial commitment is for that. We've been fighting and hearing from advocates around community hub schools with BTU staffing. And then there is an opportunity for us, if everyone is really serious about family and community engagement, then we need to fund family and community engagement. And there is a program specifically designed to do just that. And that's it's Parents as Mentors program. And it's only $200,000. That's it, to train 25 parent ambassadors to serve as real family engagement, and they get paid stipends. We can't continue to rely on family liaisons and people who have other agendas. We need parents to have an independent voice in this process. So we're looking for more dollars invested in youth jobs. I would say $2 to $3 million more, if we're really going to get to a good place. And so, yeah, those are the things that are heavy on my mind. And, Councilor Bach, I have to say, I give you a lot of props. This has been such an amazing journey. And to see you creating space for us to actually push back on the mayor and say, this is not working for us feels like, wow, I'm so grateful that I have the opportunity to tell the mayor that. So thank you. I wish I would have had this opportunity last year because I didn't get the opportunity to do that. I had to go to Twitter to talk about the things that I wanted. So to be able to have a working session and to advocate for the things that the folks who we represent are asking for, I'm highly encouraged for what this work will look like moving forward. And I remain hopeful. And I think that all in all, at the end of the day, the bottom line is that everyone needs to manage their expectations this year. We have an appointed mayor. We don't have a police commissioner. Leadership transition, we're in turmoil and in a state of transition and constant flux. What we need to do is lay down the foundation for the big fight. So whoever sits in that seat come 2022, that they come prepared to roll up their sleeves and do the work that we all have been in this session, because I will replay all of this and make sure that we go round two to see where we land and if the appetite for real change is there again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. Yeah, and definitely, as I said in the meeting on Wednesday, I feel like I have learned as a chair that we need this kind of space, I think, as a council to make our voices heard on behalf of our constituents. So appreciate you. I thank you to all colleagues for those comments. I think it was really helpful to get a bunch of things on the table. I am going to go through my memo in a moment just to talk through that, because obviously folks don't have it in front of them. Although if you want it, you can write to Michelle, MICHELLE.A.Goldberg, GOLDBERG @boston.gov, and she'll send it over. It's a public document. But I am just going to ask councilors' forbearance and take a 2-minute recess as a matter of personal privilege, if that's all right. So I'm just going to recess this hearing for 2 minutes. We'll be right back. Thank you. All right, thank you all. The hearing is coming back into order. Again, grateful to everybody. So I just wanted to run through briefly this memo that I sent over, just to kind of put it on the record for everybody. And so this was just an effort by me to think about some of the things that had come up at our Wednesday meeting and the conversations, hearing from colleagues and thinking about what would really move the needle on some of the core issues discussed. Councilor, so the first thing that came up is something that Councilor Edwards has already spoken to extensively, which is the Acquisition Opportunity Program. This is the program whereby the city supports opportunities for us to basically snag buildings that are on the market, often apartment buildings, although they can be small triple deckers. There's been a big project around that in East Boston. But an apartment building goes up on the market, and maybe it's sort of naturally affordable, or a little more affordable than other things, right? Maybe it's like a kind of what they call Class C apartments, which are they're old, they don't have the fanciest fixtures, et cetera. And so they're reasonably priced, right? And they're part of how families have historically stayed in the city. And then an investor sees an opportunity to buy them, by hook or by crook, kick everybody out, fit them up, raise the rent, and a lot of this affordable housing stock that's kind of informally affordable disappears. And it's been a repeating story around the city. And it's a great concern, I think, to all of us, and we see it in our neighborhoods. And I think just in general, we're in a moment where unfortunately there are sort of deals to be had because of the dislocation in the economy with the pandemic, and private equity folks and just folks who have deep capital pockets are taking advantage of that moment to snap things up, whether you're talking about commercial real estate with the sort of uncertainty about what office life and stuff are going to look like, or residential. And the thing is that's a competition that, your average family renting in one of those buildings just can't compete in, but the city can. The city can be part of acquiring properties like that and taking them, as Councillor Edwards said, off the speculative market. So I appreciate, Councillor Edwards, that you also made a suggestion about some of the policy aspects of the program and kind of changing the number of the amount of money per unit that the city could put in on some of those, which I think we should have further conversation with the administration about. And if you have those things written down, great. If not, we'll transcribe them on our committee side. But I think just in general, the idea that we need to grow this program, it's already reflected at a smaller level in the administration's ARP filing. They suggested putting another 4.6 million into it. But acknowledge that we have $20 million in outstanding sort of credible requests on this front in Fenway, Chinatown, Hyde Park, Mattapan, Dorchester, and surely can expect more. So Councillor Edwards, I actually, while I'm there, had a question, which was just, you said, oh, it's at 30. I wanted to go to 60.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to, where are you getting the 30 from?
Oh, sorry. Was it from your memo?
So
It's at $29 million right now.
So,
Allocated. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 29's been allocated. Yeah.
Yes, that's what it's not 60 on top, 60 total.
Okay. All right.
Okay,
Yeah.
Apologies. There was a recommended, and we discussed possibly 20. I want to do the 30, which could do the combo of the 20 for AOP plus the 10, which I had recommended for the land trust.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if that's the compromise, or we just stick with the 30 for AOP 30, and then another 10 on top, which would be then a total of 40 increase. Okay, that's how I see it.
Got it. Okay, thanks. No, that's helpful. Yeah, so my memo had suggested 20, but yeah, you're suggesting 30 here. And then on the land trust front, now let's talk a little bit about, so another thing that was in my memo is there's another type of acquisition. It's the same problem, which is,
I agree, but I disagree.
Yeah, I know you're right. So just let me finish before you disagree. So same problem. Private equity snaps up all the kind of valuable stuff lying around. And let's be clear. I think it's worth saying to everybody, like, the thing about land, it's like, we're going to have the city of Boston here, right? We've been around, like, we're talking about a charter that's changed a lot, right? But for a city that got its charter in 1630, right? So like, we've been around for centuries. We hope to be around for centuries. Piece of continuing to be around for centuries is the environmental piece, which we'll get to in a minute. But when you're a city, you can afford to, and frankly have to, make kind of long-term plays, thinking on that kind of not just years, but decades, centuries scale. And when you think about the century scale, control of land use, both for public goods and for the things communities need, like housing, is just like, it's super obvious that that's something you would want to do. And I think in our debate on Wednesday, both Councillor Edwards and Councillor Baker raised the fact that there have been times when there's been really good opportunities for the city to acquire existing buildings and land and such that we've passed by, and that we should move on those things more quickly. Now, what Councillor Edwards and I are about to disagree about is the mechanism for doing that.
Correct.
And what what I suggested in my memo is that the one agency in the city that actually has the power to acquire land and assets, buildings, et cetera, without saying this is for a municipal purpose, we're going to put XYZ public services in it, et cetera, and to actually do it directly and act as a buyer is the Boston Planning and Development Agency, because of its enabling statute. And I have long thought that we should actually be using that power for the public good, and that there'd be a good opportunity here to do something like that, with, put $10 million in and really look for bargains. And I do think there's going to be some real stuff on the commercial side that we might miss if we're not paying attention. Now, I'm going to let Councillor Edwards say her piece. I suspect that she doesn't want to put it in the BPDA's hands.
Hey, don't you suspect whatever. Hey.
Go ahead, Councillor Edwards. I yield the floor.
Thank you so much. So, I'm sure you know me very well, and that's all you understand my intentions are good. But yes, I'm not interested in increasing the land mass or the portfolio of the BPDA, because I am concerned that is an increase without an actual accountability measure. They have a lot of land as it is right now, and they do very much rely on the market forces. And not only that, but the way they're structured, those market forces pay them. And that's my biggest concern. And so they are encouraged to develop to help their coffers. And so unless we come up with a program where it's very clear that this is on lend to you to develop and to help have affordable housing, regardless of the profit that you make, which isn't how they're set up, Councillor Bach, I don't trust that it goes to them, and then we don't end up with a market forces and helping their coffers. So that's the number one concern. And then with regards to the land trusts, they are naturally mostly nonprofits. I don't know of a for-profit land trust out there yet, but they're nonprofits. They are about collective ownership and growth, and they also make sure, as part of their deeds and what runs with the land, is capping how much buildings that are built on their properties can be sold for, which does allow for certain amounts of home ownership, but to a rightful critique, it does cap sometimes the generational wealth that comes with it. I think that can be fixed in the deeds, but my biggest concern, again, is what has been proven to be extremely successful. We have one of the best in the country, DSNI. The Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative Land Trust is one of the most successful in the country. We're not putting the money and dollars behind enough of. So that is why I think $10 million, and I'll just a little bit of further background information. When I was at Office of Housing Stability, I was a director there, I specifically wanted to come up with a land trust training program for nonprofits and groups of individuals so that we didn't end up giving out parcels of land, for example, and then not having proper stewardship. I wanted it to be a 2-year program that the nonprofits would eventually be able to be awarded groups of land. How would that happen? Just to let everyone know, we get land, we get gas stations, we get property all the time through tax liens. The city of Boston ends up with some chunks and randomly has these things. So I thought initially that would be a wonderful program to match nonprofits, people who need affordable housing, with land. I still think that could happen one day. I'm not interested in designing that. I'm interested in a fiscal commitment to a design program for land trusts. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Yeah, and I agree. I'm strongly supportive of the land trust mechanism. And I think to your point, yeah, I would, if you find a for-profit land trust, you got reason to worry, right? Because the whole point is to take the profit motive out of land use and kind of focus more on community. And we've got some amazing advocates for the land trust world, including in Councillor Flint's district with Lydia Lowe. I will note though, so I'm sure there's a way to design something that's sort of in both of our headspaces. I think that DSNI's, the land for DSNI was originally acquired through the BPDA. It's one of the BPDA's best uses in its history of its powers. And I think that even just most recently, when we had the Walter Street property at the border of Councilor Arroyo and Councilor O'Malley's district, the BPDA was actually the acquirer, because if it had been acquired by the Conservation Commission first, they couldn't have done the affordable housing on it. And if it had been acquired by D&D first, they couldn't have done the wetlands on it. And so the BPDA acquired, split, and separated. And so I think there's probably a way to use the tools that I'm thinking of as just like part of being able to do this effectively. And the one way in which I want us a market player is that I want us to be able to compete with market players for the speed with which we can like make offers and execute on acquiring land. But I totally agree with you that that any such program you would want to have be ring fenced in a way that was not then just land for the BPDA to own, and to your point, develop for its kind of budget increase. Yeah, totally agree. So I think I'm thinking more about that tool in the acquisition moment. But I think that, yeah, I think there's probably a way to solve for
Two points that are inconsistent, but just wanted to bring up also, we've seen now 2, 3, now 4 times with the expiring use and the concerns that happen when, the city's developing just at that point. And when we invest money just at a certain acquisition point of the building or buying it, and we are doing it with the expiring use, and then it comes out. And so with the land trust, we wouldn't have that issue, right? It's permanently affordable, permanently going to be that way. I would say that. And then honestly, in my district, seeing the Little Mystic and land that was owned by the BPDA is entering into a lease without real, they did some community process. I'll give Devon credit for that, but ultimately the decision is theirs. And that land is going to be leased out, and they're going to get about $2 million maybe for community benefits and a 30-year lease. And that's the kind of, how do you, whatever program or whatever solution we try to come up with, Councilor Bach, it has got to allow for certain standards and correct ways in which we make sure that whatever land trust or land banking, whatever we do with the BPDA, it is really for common good, not just for the profit. Thank you.
No, strongly agree. Okay, and then just other points in my memo. And again, in many ways, my memo is just an effort to summarize the conversation from before. So, the sort of need for more strategic resources at Mass and Cass. The ARP docket 0687 does propose $3 million in additional funds for staffing and other measures at Mass and Cass, and councilors have some of the details on that, but was suggesting that it sounded from the conversation like councilors are interested in more resources that are sort of to hand. And I think Councilor Flaherty spoke to this, like that moment where somebody actually wants to accept services often is fleeting. And if you don't have kind of the medical capacity there to actually accept somebody, if, as Councilor Baker said, you're not able to keep people, you're not able to offer people a bed that goes longer than the 10, 12 days, et cetera, it's a problem. And so I think even as we all keep fighting for Long Island, it sounded like, making a real investment. There's the question of making the engagement center 24/7. There's the question of sort of what Councilor Baker referred to as a command center or coordination place to make sure that we're just super on the spot down there. But I think also there's this question about sort of longer term fit out of facilities to kind of solve what seem like some of the moments where we lose people on the potential sort of start of a continuum of care. I do not pretend to be an expert on Mass and Cass, but it is just one of the most urgent issues in our city. And of course, that shorthand talks about an epicenter of a problem that is in fact citywide and just afflicts so many of our families. So, I think definitely heard strong energy from the council around doing more on that. I think that there's an opportunity to sort of, when we think about some of the things that Councilor Braden and Council President O'Malley raised around the environment and a number of other folks, can we go from green jobs being $1 million thing this year and we don't know what's going to happen to it the next fiscal year. And so sort of how do you really build something? When we talk to Philadelphia about what their Power Core program, which is really, I would say, the best kind of conservation core type thing going right now, specifically around green infrastructure, how that got going, it was clear that a multi-year commitment and kind of the type of deep interagency work that has to happen to really develop a workforce development pipeline, get our young people in Boston into green jobs, et cetera. Like that's going to be a multi-year thing. And so, it seems like talking about the urban forestry, the composting, the urban wilds, like I said, green infrastructure, partnership with water and sewer, that sort of nexus of things that we've dreamed about on the Conservation Corps, like doing something, making a commitment with ARP funds that could be a little more multi-year now would set us up to use that million this year in a way that's sort of more permanent and tangible. So that's in this memo. I'll skip, we just discussed the sort of acquisitions question. And then Councillor Mejia referenced this already, but due to obviously from a number of councillors, certainly her advocacy, the resubmission contains 300,000 to pilot a new year-round jobs program for youth ages 19 to 24. And as she said, she had asked for 1.3, that's 0.3. And I think the question of, how could you really make a plan to go to scale on that, make it not just kind of a one-year thing, and you're not sure how many jobs it is and such. And I think it's worth noting that, I think it was either today, I'm losing track of time, or yesterday, that the President of the United States talked about the, substantial findings that the City of Boston Summer Youth Program, our Summer Youth Jobs Program, has a major impact on decreasing violence. And that's so important for our city. And it's something we're all worried about this summer, yes, but the real solution, summer jobs are important, but summer jobs as a bridge to year-round jobs, as Councillor Mejia often points out, and Councillor Flaherty does as well. Like, I just think we all sort of know that's a key solution here. And there's this like opening towards it in the budget as resubmitted, but maybe not as wide of a door as it needs to be. So I appreciate the at-large councillors pushing on that. And that seems like,
Councillor Bach, I don't
Yes.
know, I can't raise my hand because.
Go ahead, Councillor Mejia.
So I do appreciate you giving me the news of the Biden administration, pointing to the way we do business out here as a violence prevention strategy. Yes, yes, yes. And it's not just summer jobs, right? And I always often talk about the fact that I went through the PIG program. I was able to work at the Boston, at the Brigham and Women's Hospital every single summer. But I also had to work at a shoe store and McDonald's and 3 jobs during the summer just to help my family get by, right? So, what I see is that a lot of young people today are competing for the same jobs that their parents are fighting for. So this idea of getting young people jobs is not just for the young people, but oftentimes could just be to help the entire family. And, this is not just something that we're fighting for just for the sake of fighting, right? Like, this is something that is, I see as a moral imperative. I don't know what they call it. This is the moment right now. And if we're serious about addressing issues of violence, and if we talk all of this good talk, then we need to invest more money into youth jobs. And if there's a way for us to do it right now, we need that will. $300,000 is I'm
Councilor
sorry, my
Mejia.
daughter keeps interrupting my flow up in here. So I think $300,000.
Councilor Mejia, you just muted.
In order for us to get to where we need to be, we need to.
Sorry, Councilor Mejia, I don't know if you meant to mute, but we just lost you again for where we need to be, and then we lost you. Julia? Okay. Councilor Mejia, I know there's a challenge right now, but Can you hear me? Julia? Okay. Julia, if you're able to come. Yeah, now I can. Now I can.
Hello?
Yeah, we just got you back. Yep, we can hear you now. Go ahead. Julia.
Counselor Bach, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Oh God, I was yelling at my daughter. I wasn't yelling in public, was I? Jesus Lord.
No.
Interrupting my flow, and you know how it works when you're on the phone. But Counselor Bach, just my point is that $300,000 is not, it's just not going to get us to where we need to be. And we need to see bigger investments in that allocation. And I know I missed Counselor Campbell's remarks earlier, but Jacob alluded to the fact that no one's talking about public safety here in this memo, and I'm just curious about what that's all about, and why are we not leaning into it? Is it because there's no appetite here? Nobody's hungry for that type of reform? Like, what is it, like only certain people? I'm just curious, like why we're not talking about why aren't we talking about public safety?
So thank you, Councilor Mejia. What I also said when Councilor Campbell asked that question is, I strongly think that we have not heard from the police department a strong enough plan for cutting the overtime. And I'm very concerned about that. I think we did learn last year that our budget number on the police overtime, unfortunately, doesn't really determine it. As far as I'm concerned, it's really a leadership and a resolve like question. I mean, in the mayor's office, the commissioner, I personally think we should have real strong civilian fiscal oversight over the department. I didn't put anything into the memo because I was trying to summarize kind of, themes that were coming to the fore from counselors that were fairly, kind of a consensus. And what I said earlier is that I've heard very divergent views from the council about what people would like to see on the police budget front. I've heard folks who want more funding and more cadets. I've heard folks who want less cadets, fewer recruit classes, freezing, more cuts. And what I would say is this space is open for if any counselors have proposals that we can get, the majority of the body to, I'd be very happy to have them. I think that folks have definitely highlighted the 911 alternative response as a place that, you and Counselor Edwards and Wu led on and would like to see be real and substantial. I don't know if that means that we want more money for that right now, or if what we want is just to really know what it's going to look like. I think basically it's not there because everybody has been suggesting different things. So I think Councilor Mejia, that if you have any proposals that you want to make to the body and make part of this conversation with counselors, you should, because as far as I'm concerned, it's exceedingly frustrating to have a department budget that doesn't feel like it's really under our control. And as a Ways and Means Chair, I find it really frustrating. And I think that ultimately, as Councilor Edwards alluded to, the contract is the only way to sort of make that not true. And that's something that I intend to be very firm on as long as I'm running this committee. But if you have any proposals on things that, would help us get to yes and make more serious reform on that, please make them.
No, I'm just thinking about last year, there were definitely there was more consensus around this issue. So again, it's last year. So we have to deal with this hand that we are dealt with this year. So I am curious though, if in the spirit of compromise, right? Is there a way for us to put a pause on the new class, maybe starting potentially in January instead of this year, and then we can reevaluate? I mean, because right now, I just feel like the system right now, it's like you're hiring people to work in a system that has some flaws, if we're really serious about bold systemic changes, right, which is what I keep hearing from everybody, is that, you know, can we clean up the house and get the situation in a good place before we add more folks to the workforce? I'm thinking about all of the corruption in the overtime scandals that we have been dealing with here in the city of Boston. Like all of these things, I feel like, can we just put a pause and wait until we have our house in order?
I mean, thank you, Councilor Mejia. I think that's a proposal we can put on the floor. I mean, both to the administration and to the council. The idea of, so just to be clear, sorry, were you suggesting that the July class not happen? Or that the January one not?
Like we wait until like the July class not happen, because see, this is what I keep thinking about. In November, all of this is going to change. This whole conversation is probably going to look very different, right? So in this moment of tension that we're experiencing right now, can we propose at the very least, instead of launching a new class in July during this transition and turmoil that we happen to find ourselves in, and have that class start perhaps in January? And then when we have when the formal leadership comes in, the one that whoever gets elected and whatever commissioner gets put in, that we can tackle these issues. Like, I don't understand if everyone is like worried about the 112 budget and all this other stuff, like, aren't we worried about all of these decisions that we're making right now in this time too? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. Like, can we just pause on these classes at least until January?
Thank you. No, Councilor Mejia, I'll put that on the list of things that we're forwarding to the administration to address on Monday. And I think obviously if we do go to a 112, the irony is that it's the police budget that goes up a little bit because it was higher last year than it's budgeted for this year. But yeah, no, I think we should put it on the list. So, all right. I'm just gonna quickly finish running through these things in the memo. So one is around digital infrastructure. And I have to say, I mean, I strongly agree, Councilor Mejia, that municipal broadband is in the long term, it's the direction that the city, I think, should be going. I think our people need it. I think that in the long run, it's going to be obvious that broadband is a utility in the same way that like water is. And I think that, you know, we've just ended up in a weird intermediate time where people get bad broadband service for too much money, and it's just not going to make any sense in a real digital world. I think the place where the $200,000 timeline that the administration has committed in the resubmission to doing, I know what you're urging, does make sense, is that when we talked to Do It in the hearing about what they thought the price tag on municipal broadband would be, you know, their read was that it was probably a $2 billion thing over 5 to 10 years. So that's obviously major capital work. It's competitive with the kind of needs that our schools have, certainly that our public housing has and such. And so I think, first of all, that actually embarking on that kind of capital plan probably does need to be the decision of the mayor post the election. And also that, you know, you do need a real detailed plan and like to measure twice, cut once, if you're going to go in that direction, which I want us to go in. So I think, you know, I don't think that it would make sense for us to ask in this budget for the administration to fund a portion of that $2 billion potential plan. But I think getting it on the table, which is the step that San Francisco has already taken, they've already done this kind of study and figured out what it's going to look like. And in fact, when they say $2 billion in 5 to 10 years, I mean, that's basically us copying San Francisco's numbers, because we're roughly the same size, but we do need to know that for Boston. So that's just a little bit more context on that. They did make an interesting comment, Do It, about a federal program that might help us do more broadband for families, like in their capacity as library users and BPS families. And I think figuring out more about that, is there any development on that, would be good. But But one thing that is, I know, dear to my heart, your heart, Counselor Flynn always brings up, what are we doing for our BHA developments? And there actually is some of the funding that the administration suggested for the ARP docket is to get us like actual Wi-Fi in that's like public and accessible in all our community spaces in our BHA housing. But my understanding is that the money that we're providing to BHA to support that is going to help them get a bunch more of those properties online, but that they have a whole portfolio of those. And I personally want to better understand how we can help make that happen faster. Because I think if we take care of the families who live in BHA and need internet, whether they're our seniors trying to stay connected or our school kids or whatever, like that would make a huge difference. And that is kind of where I want us starting. So I know that we laid cable to a lot of housing developments, but until you actually turn it into Wi-Fi that people can access, it doesn't help them. So Councillor Flynn, I don't know if you wanted to say anything on that.
No, I think it's a great point, Councillor Bach. Digital equity is a critical issue in our city, especially to remote areas that are difficult to reach, such as BHA developments. It's not the best technology infrastructure setup. So, difficult to reach residents in Mary Ellen McCormick or Cathedral, which is one of the oldest developments, West 9th Street, certainly St. Botolph Street, West Dedham Street. But, we have to make sure that all of our residents have equal access to digital equity, and that includes residents in BHA developments, our immigrant neighbors and seniors and persons with disabilities, in making sure young families as well have access to it. I was talking to a young family in Chinatown recently. I think they lived at Mass Pike Towers. And the two children, I was talking to the mother, there's two children, and only at one time and they're both Boston Public School kids, only at one time could one of the students use the internet. And then if they tried to, it would shut down. So it was difficult for this Chinese family to, have their studies during the school year because of digital access to digital equity. So it's a critical issue. Thank you, Councillor Bach and Councillor Mejia and Councillor Braden and so many people for focusing on it, Mayor Janey. But it's an important issue in our city, and I just want to say thank you to my colleagues for working so hard on it.
Thank you so much, Councillor Flynn. And I think it is, Joel Wolf, formerly of Councillor Edwards' staff, is working quite actively on it right now over at BHA. So we'll give Team Edwards a shout out as well. I think it's super important, and finding ways that we can support it seems important, and like a really good use of ARP funds. And I think right now there's like 400,000 in for that, and it seems like a place we could grow. And then just to finish out the memo, I had put in an idea about, could we do something? This might be a little bit more challenging just because you're talking about a new program. And I think that is a little bit harder for us to launch in this conversation over the next few days. But thinking about, is there something we can do for the city to proactively step in and kind of help with matchmaking our small local businesses, our minority owned, women owned, veteran owned businesses, and these long-term commercial vacancies in our main streets that are such a blight, many of which were a blight before the pandemic and which has only gotten worse. And thinking about, again, making sure that it's not just all the private equity guys who swoop in and then you've got chains on every block, and you're not kind of getting that local proprietorship that we treasure. So I think the question of us doing something around there seems important to me. And then the last thing in my memo was just turning to the BPS question and summarizing the fact that I think, the council, Councillor O'Malley's already spoken to the exam school question. And I think there's a number of things in the mix, but some of the things that councillors raised as places that they really want to see more investment. One you've heard a lot about already, Madison Park. definitely both facilities and programming there. Another thing that Councillor Flynn's been consistent on, and lots of our colleagues, is the need for just a major HVAC revamp of our school building portfolio. We all saw that in the pandemic. It's a disaster, especially our buildings that we know we're keeping for a long time, right? It's one thing if there's a building that we know we're just going to replace, and that's tricky. But I think with the buildings that we know that they're part of our stock, it's just like you can't have another moment like this pandemic where our facilities are not usable and safe for our kids. And I know Councillor Flynn, you raised that already today. Councillor Mejia talked about peer mentoring, the question of a library in every school. Again, thinking about the sort of one-time ESSER funds there. Could that really be a new marker that we reach? And then the issue of sort of mental health supports and surging those this year. And the thing for folks who may not know, with the school budget, the council just approves the top line number. So the total amount of money that we are sending from the general fund to BPS. The detail of the BPS budget is set by the school committee. I mean, we don't technically vote on that. So sort of the amount in the sub-departments in BPS. But I do think that the council can, talk with the superintendent and the school committee about sort of expectations around some of that ESSER funding and kind of things that are going to be a focus in the year ahead as part of approving a potential BPS budget. And the current proposed BPS budget, the new money in it, the stuff that we lose in a 112 is almost all going to support sort of these 90 social workers and large number of family liaisons to support our students in a really, a difficult return year ahead. So that's a sort of another area of conversation. So that was just, I wanted to run quickly through my memo. My staff has also been taking notes throughout this, and we will be compiling and sending over to the administration. The questions that came up today, the suggestions, the sort of like things where we want to know where they are on some of this. And our, and I would just say to council colleagues that anything that didn't come up today, but that people think of and realize they want to have in this conversation, please send it our way, and we'll compile that as well. And then we are meeting with the administration at 1 p.m. on Monday. And so we'll be discussing with them both these questions around a supplemental appropriation and what's actually in the resubmission and the things that have come in response to council advocacy over the last month. Because I think there are some good things there, and we haven't had a chance yet, Councillor O'Malley alluded to get some of the detail on some of those things. So that's the plan for Monday, talking to the administration, and then also we'll be hearing from the public. That'll be a public hearing. And so if you're interested in testifying for that, you can go online on the council website and sign up to testify, or shoot an email. I don't know which address it's going to be, but I know if you email ccc.wm@boston.gov, we can get you the info for the Monday hearing. And so, our goal, as I mentioned at the top, is really to figure out how to get to a budget that the council can feel comfortable passing by the fiscal year end, and thinking about what are the supplemental things we need to make that so. Recognizing that, as Councillor Sabi George said, we're never have a perfect budget, but that also this is like a really specific moment with the number of needs we face, the amount of federal funding available, and the sense that kind of like, that the city's really relying on all of us to come together and have a more collaborative process. So I'm looking forward to a collaborative conversation with the admin on Monday, and I will be putting all those things together. So before I conclude, I'm going to let councilors say if any final words. Councillor Mejia, I see your hands raised.
Yes. So Councillor Bach, I'm really trying to think about the timeline, right? I understand and appreciate the June 30th situation. And if I know that we don't have a council meeting on that Wednesday because of the holiday. I mean, after the 30th, the first Wednesday of July is a holiday. So I'm just curious about when will we reconvene? Like after the 30th, if God forbid we need to, like I need to figure out some things. I need to figure out what that looks like. And I don't think you're going to have an answer for me right now, but I would like to know what the first week of July is going to look like.
Well, so would I. And very much the goal of all of this is, again, for us to reach what is a very real fiscal year end deadline on the 30th. I'm not really interested in making plans for failure. What I will say, Councillor Mejia, is that the council president, O'Malley, is capable of calling a special meeting of the council whenever he wants, with the condition that it has to be 48 hours in advance, and it's got to be on obviously on work days. So certainly it's not like he has the ability to amend the council schedule in that sense for a meeting. But I'll just stress that, you can have a meeting, but having a meeting, it doesn't get us there, right? Unless we've actually come to some agreement. So I think that no matter what, us getting to a budget for the people of Boston is going to involve this collaboration between the council and the mayor to get to yes. And I think knowing that that's what it's going to take, it really behooves all of us to come together and do that work before the 1st of July and not after, because we're all going to have to be part of making it happen. And I think leadership is really getting it done by Wednesday. So that is going to be what I am working towards with all my heart here.
All right, because I'm gonna have to let at least know what her life is gonna look like the first week of July. So I just need to figure some things out. So, okay.
Yeah, I think all of us would like to enjoy the 4th of July week with our families, but I think, obviously we gotta
do the people's work. Absolutely.
We gotta do this very important work for the people first. And there is no reason that we cannot get it done by the 30th on schedule.
Yeah, we'll see about that.
All right, Councillor Flynn, did you have any final words?
Yes, thank you, Councilor Bork. I know I mentioned it earlier when I first spoke, but as I was at this meeting last night in South Boston, there were over 200 people there. We actually lost a young man on a motorcycle last weekend who's deceased. So our thoughts and prayers are with him. But as I was talking to the residents of South Boston, one of my neighbors said to me, the city of Boston is getting what, 450 million is it in federal funds over the next 4 or 5 years, I believe. This gentleman said to me, can some of that money be used for the Slow Streets program? What we're doing is neighborhood against neighborhood to see who gets this great program. And every neighborhood has pedestrian safety related issues and challenges. And as I said last night, I think pedestrian safety and a speeding car is a public health emergency. That's how dangerous the streets are in my neighborhood of South Boston. They're like that in the South End too. They're like that in the downtown area. I don't think it's just District 2. I think it's across the city. So I'm wondering, Councilor Bork, are we able to have a significant conversation about pedestrian safety and our federal funds, and what role we can play in making sure we communicate with the administration on pedestrian safety issues with this large pot of money? And in my last comment, Councilor Bork, again, thank you for giving me the opportunity. You were talking about Mass Ave and Melnia Cass earlier. I forgot to mention, during this pandemic, the rate of HIV and AIDS has increased over the last 18 months in the city. I've talked to the medical directors at East Boston Health Center, the South End Health Center, South Boston, Fenway Community Health Center. I talked to Dr. Lowe at the Public Health and with Chief Martinez as well. I just want to make sure that we get back. We have excellent medical professionals, but we need to make sure that we provide these services and care and necessary medical assistance and education and prevention and to people living with HIV and AIDS. I think that's a critical issue in our city. We must do all we can for those living with AIDS, but also educating people that are in the Mass Ave area about HIV and AIDS. I think it's another major issue we're dealing with, and it hasn't received the attention that it should have over the last 18 months. But it's critical we have the funding in this budget for that critical issue. So again, thank you, Councilor Bach, for your exceptional leadership during this budget process.
Thank you so much, Councilor Flynn. Yes, and we'll bring the pedestrian safety question to the administration on Monday. I think that I want more details from them. I think that they may have put some substantial money for that in the resubmission. So let's talk to them about that on Monday. But I think even if they put something in the resubmission, there's, to your point, the larger question about what portion of these funds could we use for something really transformative on pedestrian safety. So looking forward to talking to them about that. And I know that they also mentioned, I know there's some of that funding for the HIV focus in the ARP, the order 0687. So, but we can circle back with them again on that. That'd be great. Councilor Mejia, sorry, I just wanted to check. Everyone else has waived their final. I just see your hand still up, so I wasn't sure if it was on from before or if you wanted to make a further comment. All right, I think it's just.
Mark, I just want to say thank you. I just applaud you and how you've handled all of this with so much grace and patience with all of us. I know you're in the hot seat, and just want you to know that I really do appreciate you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate you all coming and participating today, and everybody's, I mean, like you said, Councilor Mejia, everybody's passion for the city of Boston and the important things in our budget is coming through. And so that's a great thing about this body. And it's why I'm optimistic about us getting a yes. So thank you, everyone. With that, this working session of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee is adjourned. Have a good night.